Nithyanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dvandvatitam Gagana Sadrusham
Tattvamasyaadhilaksham Ekam Nityam Vimalamajalam Sarvadhi Sakshi Bhutam Bhavaditam Trigunarahidam Sadgurum Tam Namami.
Nithyanandam. We welcome all the Sri Mahants, Kotaris, Tanedars, Samajis, Satsangis and Balasans to this Vaakyaartha Sadhas conducted by the Balasans of Nithyananda Gurukul. Today's topic for Vaakyaartha Sadhas is on Swamiji Satsangs.
I have a question. Can somebody please explain me how can we keep aligning back to our context?
What I feel is when you are giving an authentic listening to Swamiji Satsangs and when you know how you should live, when Swamiji explains like how in Ishavasya Upanishad the importance they give for the context. So in almost all the verses they give the importance for context. So when you live what is told by the Upanishadic Rishis, when you live that you will be aligned back to your context. So for example you have the context for example your purpose is to live Advaita. So each and everything that you do, you should say, am I living in the space of Advaita when I do this? Am I radiating Advaita when I do this? So when you keep aligning each action to the context, you will start living the context itself.
Want to add to the point? You should always like before any action, you should always remind yourself of the context of why you are doing that action.
Adding a point, what I feel is that more and more we listen to Swami Satsangs and it's so practical. Whatever he speaks is like you can directly use it in your day-to-day life. And as well as when you do Vaakyaartha about it, that manana happens in you and automatically the Nidhityasana happens. So you just start living with the context. So this is why I feel like one of the ways where you can start living with the right context.
What I feel is not only just listening to the satsangs and doing manana in Vaakyaartha, but you have to have a decisive decision. You have to take a decisive decision to live in your life. Then only the Nidhityasana happens, where you can explore more and more the truths and start living them, so that you will reach the goal of enlightenment, which is our only purpose. So we all are here only for the purpose of enlightenment. When we just listen to Swami Satsang and do Vaakyaartha, it is not enough. But when we keep doing the manana and keep internalizing and decide to live it in day-to-day life, then only we'll start living the truths what Swamiji says.
I have a question. What in us decides the context? Like before we setting this right context, like listening to Swami Satsang, and before we setting the right context, what actually in us decides the context of whatever we do? We'll surely have one or the other context to do things, right? So which part of us is going to decide it?
What I feel is before we set the right context, when we do actions, that time like when incomplete the actions we do, at that time the incompletion and like when we are in the control of incompletions make the context. For example, you want more, you're greedy for more and more money, so you are starting a business. So at that point your greed for more money will set the context why you are doing the business. So this is what I think sets the context before you set the right context.
What I feel is before starting any action, if you're in the space of completion, the completion part in you decides the context, where the whole thing which you go through the action or when you're going through the action will be completely complete, and you know what for you're doing that and why are you doing that. So you'll be complete about the action, and that is what decides the context. But if you're incomplete about some action, I feel that will be the context is not set from the space of completion. You don't even care for the completion space in you. There is a time where you get incomplete and you don't set the right context, is what I feel.
Adding the point, Mitra. So what I understood is when, like how he said. So example, if anyone sets a context for any business, like for greed, so when you just start setting a context for greed, that doesn't be a right context, because greed doesn't lead us to enlightenment. So when we just set the completion context, which is for not for any other greed or jealous, when we just set the context for it, so it lead us to enlightenment, because it is not anyway leading us to greed or violence. So when we just do from the context with completion, Advaita, oneness. It just leads us to enlightenment.
I have a question. In few statements ago, Ma Satyamaya told that when we are in incompletion and align our context, we will only be deciding our incompletion only will be deciding our context. But we are deciding the context for aligning to the space of completion only, right?
What I understood when she made the statement is like whenever you're deciding things or whenever you're doing something out of the space of incompletion, then obviously incompletions are the one which is setting the context. Whenever you're doing something out of incompletion, if you see even in your life, if take any example, any incident, it'll obviously be like you start from incompletion and it'll go with lot of mess ups only, because there will be no part that incompletion will not be wanting to align to the purpose of life and all. What I understand is deciding from the space of incompletion itself is like deciding against life. So obviously there is nothing like which is deciding like aligning you back to the context, like right context at all. So this is what I understood from the statement. So I don't think like anything when you said context out of incompletion, it will lead you to completion.
Adding to the point, what I meant by telling that incompletion will lead to incompletion is because when you are incomplete and doing some action, you will not even have the right context, because you will not be in the space of listening to yourself to set the right context for yourself. So at that point, any action you do will surely lead you to incompletion because you don't have the right context.
Adding the point, so when you just have the context like the incompletion, so incompletion only be with you and work with everything, but the incompletion not leads you to enlightenment or any proper action. So in that way, when you just do it in the space of completion, everything just leads to enlightenment and just aligns you to the context. When you just align the context for enlightenment, or like context for what reason, good reason for you to do, when you just set the proper context like that, you will just understand what we are doing and you will just know what are you doing. But in the way when you do in incompletion, you don't know what you're doing. Incompletion will be with you, part of you, and do whatever it wants.
Just adding a point, like in Gurukul, for each and every action we do, we set the right context. So because of that, we don't have any incompletions in the actions we do.
I have a question. Like when we are in incompletion, if we decide if we are deciding to complete with it and we are aligning back to our context of enlightenment, will it lead us to enlightenment?
What I feel is yes, because once you complete the incompletion and start setting the right context for every action you do, naturally whatever action you do will always be aligned to the purpose of your life. For example, the purpose of your life is enlightenment, and you're setting the context as enlightenment. So when you keep reminding yourself every action into the purpose, the context, enlightenment, and you like know why you're doing every action, naturally it leads you to your goal, that is enlightenment.
As what I feel is like as this world itself happened for an action. So what I feel, when you set a right context and aligning to your purpose of enlightenment, whatever you do, I just feel your whatever action you do after that, it'll just be completion. So you'll just start experiencing the divine inside you. This is what I feel.
Adding a point, what I feel is yes, because when you complete with all the incompletions, you will be aligning yourself to your purpose of life.
I have a question with what Ma Pankaja told. You told that the whole world is just for action, right? What did you exactly mean by that? Because at so many situations, you can stop any act from the right context, right? So there is no action which is taking place. So what did you exactly mean by the whole world is just for action?
What I feel is like you just being happening in this world and just continue to radiate the space of the consciousness. So what I feel exactly is you just happen here to just realize your real you. So this is what I meant.
Having a question, if we decide a context by incompletion, will it lead us to enlightenment?
What I feel is like when you are in incompletion, if you decide if you have the context aligned to the purpose of enlightenment, it will lead you to the purpose of your life.
Just adding a point, what I feel is when you make like any context out of incompletion, it won't lead to enlightenment, because every time you make an context of incompletion always be based on the fear or greed, which is also incompletions. So naturally fear and greed are not aligned to enlightenment. So what I feel, when you set a context of incompletion, they won't lead to enlightenment.
Having a question about what you told, but there is zero right or wrong, right?
What I feel is when you take an action or a context or of incompletion, there's nothing wrong in it, but it'll just take a longer time for you to get enlightenment, because ultimately all our purposes is to get enlightened. So when you keep taking context out of incompletion, doing action out of incompletion, naturally it takes longer for us to achieve the purpose of our life, there is enlightenment.
Just adding to his point, when you know what you have to do for your life to reach your goal, why waste time in doing something which will not expand you in your life? So what I feel is just aligning back to your context will lead you more faster to your purpose of enlightenment.
Adding a point, what I feel is like how I understand this to be is, it's like we are in a staircase and the goal is there. Goal is enlightenment. And whenever we decide for life and whenever we are setting the right context, we are actually moving towards the goal. And whenever we are not setting the right context, and whenever we are doing any action out of that incompletion, and whenever you deciding something out of your vested interest, you are moving away from your goal. That is moving down the stairs. So this is the way how I understand. So it is just your simple decision to go towards the goal. That's all. There's nothing to do about like right or wrong at all in this, because there's nobody to decide whether something is right or wrong.
Just adding a point, what I feel is setting a right context before we start any action or perform an action is very important, because only then we'll know like why we are doing the action. Otherwise, the wrong context, without a context into an action, like we'll just do it without knowing why we are doing it. So what I feel is like you have to always set a right context before doing any action. Just so like even in the Upanishads, like for example, Isavasya Upanishad, it emphasizes so much on context. There are so many verses emphasizing on context and meant for setting the right context. So I feel setting a right context before doing any action is very important.
Adding the point, like how he said that, for example, one person is taking a mic for speaking, but without knowing anything, if he just pick up the mic, he'll not anything to speak. So same like that, when you just set the context for speaking and what you're speaking, when you just understand that, you will know to speak and what you're speaking. But when you simply pick up the mic and keep near you and on it, it'll be no useful. Because when you set a context and understand what you're speaking, if you take up the mic and keep near you, okay, that will be the useful. So please understand, when you just do without context, it will not lead you to enlightenment and the purpose for your life.
I have a question. If people in the outer world, their context for life is something different, how to enrich them?
What I feel is that only when we start living it, people around us just catch it. Like how a few days ago when Swamiji came to Gurukul, he told that whenever it's like we are like a lamp, when a lamp is lit, automatically when another lamp comes next to it, then even that lamp will be lit. So it's like whenever we are living with the right context, the other people around us also just feel so inspired and they'll also start living. Like how people around Swamiji, they just because he is living from the right context, people around him also just catch it and start living it, or at least they get inspired to start like aligning. They at least try to align themselves to the context. So what I feel is the only way is just when we start living it, people around us will just catch it.
Just adding a point, what I feel is nobody's purpose, like whether outer world, anywhere, can be like not enlightenment, because the ultimate purpose was we all have come down and taken this birth is to like gain enlightenment. So if any of us do actions or set a wrong context, it will only take more time for us to achieve enlightenment, but ultimately one day we have to achieve enlightenment. So what I feel is, first of all, nobody can not have enlightenment as a context, because that is the purpose why we came down in this birth.
I have a question. Like, as our purpose of life itself is enlightenment and we come down for that, then why when we come down we just forget the context of enlightenment?
What I feel is that when we are born, we don't have that intelligence. We just, like how someone told, that we need to create that intelligence, and we create our intelligence based on what the ideas we collect from our surroundings. So when we are born, we are with that ignorance, and whatever the society around us tells, we just catch it. They're already filled with so many incompletions, and they're functioning from a totally different context. And so when that ambience is not provided, automatically you just collect all those different ideas and create your own context and live based on the context which you have. So that's why what I feel is that's why we even miss the purpose of our life. That's why even we miss that context of enlightenment in us.
Just adding a point, what I feel is when we are born, we all are like naturally complete because the nature is completion. So we all are, when you're born, complete. But as we know, like start growing up and start relating with people around us, like we start picking up the incompletion simply to play with them. For example, we don't get something and we start crying for it as a baby, and immediately our mother will come and give us what we want. So what I feel at that time, we get into the cognition of, okay, if I cry for this thing, I will get it. So once we get into that pattern, like the cognition, it becomes more and more strong in us until one day it becomes a pattern in us and we are in its grip. So what I feel, at the start we only pick up the incompletion to play with it or to get what we want. But as we grow older and start doing the same thing more and more, we start feeling it's a very important part of us.
Adding a point, like how in outer world you have the ambience where the people just keep pulling you down to not have the right context. Like same way, like in Gurukul, we have the satsanga around us where each one keeps pushing them up for enlightenment, only purpose of our life. So whenever we go down, there are so many of them helping each one to pull up for the only purpose of enlightenment.
At the point, so if you want to have the space of enlightenment and reach enlightenment, you can come and join Gurukul. That is each and everything. We just set the context for doing and everything. So whatever Swamiji speaks every day morning, so we just understand what he's speaking and just listening what he's telling. So when we just do that listening again and again, so we start understanding what he's speaking. So every day we do spiritual practices like Vaakyaartha, chanting and other things, blindfolded. So when we just start doing this, we set a right context for each and everything. So when we just constantly do this practices, it just easily leads us to enlightenment.
Just adding a point, what I feel is the best way to get rid of our incompletion and start setting the right context and living in a life is just to attend the July Varanasi IA, where Swamiji will take care of us and he will guide us to the process of completing the incompletion and setting the right context. And not only setting the right context, he'll also teach us and help us to the maximum of how to start living it. So he'll help us from the teaching to the living. So what I feel the best way to get rid of incompletion and set the right context for our life is just to attend the July Varanasi IA.
Adding a point, what I feel is that when we are any action, whatever we do, the context is set, the decisions we make, everything is set by our biomemory. So and our patterns. So when these patterns are cleared and when our biomemory is just programmed just for enlightenment, then obviously the decisions we make and the context we set and all will be automatically just for enlightenment and will be deciding for life. So when we attend this Varanasi in the Shivoham process, Swamiji directly change our biomemory and program it just for enlightenment. So obviously any decision we take or any whatever context we set, it will all be like automatically for enlightenment and will be deciding for life. So this is one of the very easy way to set a right context automatically with there's no individual effort at all.
Want to share an experience? Before going to Cambodia Inner Awakening, actually, we were enriching our parents for us to go for the Cambodia Inner Awakening. So, actually, I had a very wrong context of I have to go for Shivam, whatever happens. I was we can say I was very stubborn. So, and that too only for Inner Awakening, not even Inner Awakening for kids. When my parents started telling, okay, you at least attend Inner Awakening for kids, at least attend that, then I became powerless and even started crying. But that day when I went and completed and set the right context, then everything started flowing in and I was able to attend Inner Awakening itself.
I have a question. Isn't it like decision is more important than the context? Because even to set the context, it's you who are deciding to set the context, right? So decision is only playing a major role than the context, right? So how can context be higher than God itself?
What I feel is even to decide you have a context that you have to reach something. That is why you are deciding, right? So the context is more higher than the decision or God.
Just adding a point, what I feel is when we take a decision of a wrong context, like we won't have the right context for doing anything, because and it won't have any use also. For example, we are taking the decision of doing inner awakening for playing, and somehow we make it there and we start playing and doing all sorts of stuff. Then the inner awakening won't have the effect on us, or the inner awakening for kids won't have the actual complete effect. So what I feel is only when the decision is taken out of the right context will be expressed to its fulfillment.
Adding a point, I don't think that inner awakening will not have any effect on you. Whatever context you may go and attend inner awakening for, Swamiji is there just to shift you from what are we going in attending inner awakening for? It's just for us to shift from this aham to shivoham. So how much ever we try, it will not be able to make it. Only when Swamiji decides, he just picks us up and pull us up back to his space. So what I feel is whatever context you may go and attend inner awakening for, he'll just transform that context into the right context and make you realize that you are nothing but him.
Just adding the point, like how Swamiji said, even if you go in the context of playing, if you just go sit in that hall, that's enough. The space of Mahadeva just takes you to the higher level. So even if you go in the space of playing, but Swamiji will make sure that you're experience the space of Mahadeva and the what is even speaking about. So even from the context, if you just go sit, that's enough. Mahadeva will just make sure everything is happening. The responsibility from your side is just go and sit. Then Mahadeva will just take care of everything.
I have a question. Like even to decide for to set the context and all, like even after we know, even after we listening to different satsangs of Swamiji and all those, what is it like the urgency in us is what is missing for us to decide and get back to the right context? And if it is like the urgency only which is missing, how to get that urgency in us? What will get the urgency in us to set the right context and start acting from that?
What I feel is we don't care for our purpose. When you really what you say, the urgency, when you really have the seeking to just be one with Swamiji and reach a space of enlightenment, every moment you will be living what Swamiji said. But because we don't care for what Swamiji says, and we don't care and don't have the urgency, what I feel is that is a time where we are just diluted and we don't want to align back to our purpose. So what I feel is each and every moment when you keep reminding yourself about your purpose of life and have the urgency and the seeking to reach a space of enlightenment as Swamiji, you will surely reach a space of enlightenment.
What I feel that is which is not getting the urgency in you is like our Swami told one day that other than discovering your consciousness, whatever you do other than that is waste of time. So what I feel is continuously whatever situation comes in front of you, just continuously decide for life and see, I am Mahadeva, I am part of this consciousness and this is part of me. When you understand this and continuously decide, you will understand and you will have the urgency to reach the enlightenment space.
Adding a point, when we live around the master, we start getting the urgency to get enlightened.
Adding the point, like how or balance, adding the point, so like how he said, so like how we balance, we every time listen to the satsang morning and just follow the spiritual activities and whatever Swamiji we tell, we just follow. So when whatever Swamiji tells, we just follow. So when we follow, what happens? So it is like we just leading us to an enlightenment urgent. That is, when we just follow whatever Swamiji tells, when we just start following, it can easily lead us to enlightenment.
What I feel is, like when you want to constantly align back to the context, like how we have to live around the master. And to live around the master constantly and align back to your context, come and join Gurukul so that you experience the highest context of your life.
Just adding a point, what I feel is when we start living around the master and start following what the master says, like we start getting inspired at the master, we start getting the wow feeling, like wow, the master's like he does so much. So we start getting inspired by the master and we start having the inspiration to start living like him. So when I live around the master more and more, what I feel is we start getting the urgency to gain enlightenment.
Like what I feel is when we continuously live around the Master, whenever we are so tired to fall down, Master is tirelessly raising us up. So what I feel is continuously being with the Master will just have the urgency to reach the enlightenment space.
So what I understood from this is like whenever we are living around the Master, he'll just give us that wow experience. So automatically we'll start feeling inspired and we'll start moving towards him. Like we'll start feeling like I should become like him. We'll start, that pull will be there, the urgency will be there in us. So obviously we'll start aligning to whatever he tells and all. So even if we get into the space of incompletion, he's always there with us to just put us back into the space of completion. He'll give situations like that. Just due to his uncompromised compassion, we'll just become like him. So what I feel is like just by living around the Master, especially like when you live around Swamiji, he's provided you with all comforts. And it's like you're sitting on the flight and he's just making everything happen for you, so that you realize that you're nobody else, nothing else, but just him. So this is how I feel like just by living around the Master, you can, all the wrong context and all the wrong ideas whichever you have, all the things which is like against, deciding against life, and all can just be shifted to the space of enlightenment. You can just connect back to the space of enlightenment.
Adding a point, just like one day Swamiji told in one of his satsangs, Swamiji told that we may get tired of falling down, but he never gets tired of raising us up. So we get the urgency of enlightenment.
With this, we come to the conclusion of today's Vaakyaartha Sadhas. We'll continue to explore into the deeper truths of what Swami speaks in further satsang. Now we'll end it with the Purna Mantra.
Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamataya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sarvam Sadguru Padukarpanamastu. Om